Hey, my name is Andrew Kaplan, and you're in the middle of listening to a 7-part mini-series going behind the scenes with the Navattic growth team. We explored all kinds of things that typically don't get shared publicly in the growth community. We talked about how they think about growth, how they set their strategy, their operating system, what they track, what they don't track, how often they share internally to drive alignment, and we talked about some of their biggest challenges, their fears, and their speed bumps along the way. Let's jump back in where we left off. All right, so we're going to talk about managing expectations. And really, when I think about managing expectations, I think it's important if you work in growth because most people don't know what growth is still. Even if you do know what growth is, what you're working on in any given moment can be really subjective. And in my experience, alignment is the silent killer for people that work in growth, meaning even if y'all are working on objectively the right things in the right way, if you don't bring other folks along with you, you can still end up in a place where you're getting feedback or people are confused about what you're doing or maybe unhappy with what you're not doing. So I want to hear a little bit more about that. So where I figured we could start is maybe we can start at the high level and you can talk a little bit more about alignment at the leadership level. What does that look like for you and what systems do you have that help?
Yeah, I know before I talked really a lot about like aligning on the problem. I think that's kind of step number one is like do all of leadership. And one thing I really like is it's generally like most of the leadership team coming together. It's not just our CEO. It's not just the founding team. It's all leadership coming together and be like, what are the top problems? Again, what are all the data points we're hearing all throughout the funnel that's saying, hey, we need to work on that. And then once we get feedback of like, okay, this is our priority this quarter. This is what we're focused on. Then that's when I usually go, we'll talk about, okay, what are some ways that we can solve that problem?
And have there been times where you've had to do a reset there? Where you've had to realign where you were feeling really good and then all of a sudden there was some information that either you didn't have or wasn't shared with you or that surprised you that made you change course?
Especially when times get a little tougher. Like this quarter, as I mentioned, it was definitely a little bit slower of a quarter than we were originally expecting. There's experiments we're running. This is where we should be focusing. But really, our focus probably should have been on really diagnosing what's going on and addressing that head on. And I feel like a lot of the early experiments we ran were more learning how to run experiments, how to use different systems. So they were smaller and maybe didn't have as much impact on MQLs, which was ultimately the thing we needed to focus on. So a moment of having to sort of realign and say, okay, we need our experiments to focus. Like we almost just need a little bit of a quick win in this area versus going around it.
I think it was like super easy to reprioritize that based on like leadership and just like changing priorities. And we were able to like really quickly kind of change course a little bit. So I think it was like getting that feedback and then figuring out what to do basically.
Yeah.
Which is good.
So when you do have alignment, so you go through these things, you try to get on the same page. What about sharing? Do y'all have like a sharing operating system in terms of sharing some of your wins or some of a learner or a winner? How do you think about what to share, how often to share it, and who to share it with?
We have a Slack channel where we share wins for experiments and learnings from experiments. It's definitely something we think about is like, what kinds of experiments do we want to share? I think for things that are bigger, that have more of an impact across the site, we definitely highlight those winners. And I think it's also really important to us to share when we like don't hit success metrics, because I think part of what's really great about being so public with everything is like it builds that culture too in the rest of the org. It's like, oh, we're trying things out. We're experimenting, like this is part of our DNA. And that helps us just be more experimental and get ideas and iterate. So there's a lot of value to being really public about where we're learning. And so I think we definitely highlight things that affect a lot of the website, a lot of traffic, and we're really public about our learners.
If we could think about a typical month, maybe we'll just zoom out. I don't want to say week because I know that there's some meetings that happen on a monthly or biweekly cadence. But if we think about a typical month, how often are y'all sharing? And in what places does that sharing happen?
I mean, probably daily, but I'd say high level, we do those weekly meetings with the whole team. So a lot of times if we have a big win, so we recently had a big win around like personalizing our interactive demos, we show the visitor. And so that we highlight to the entire company because there's also just like a cool insight for everyone, maybe advice they can give to customers. But that's kind of like when we have either like a really big win or maybe a really big learning if something didn't work, that would also help other companies understand our ICP better or help customers or prospects or help their talk track. That's when we try to share it entirely. When it's just like smaller wins or losses, well, especially some things that maybe weren't as conclusive, but we decided to kill an experiment so we could start a new one. I think that's where the Slack channel is really helpful. And then also, of course, people can like subscribe. As Raman said, we set up the notion people can subscribe to it. So they could also just see themselves as things are progressing along.
Yeah, we'll just like really shout out and like magnify things that we think will impact most teams. And like what Natalie was saying, if it was more of a smaller optimization or it's like an ad experiment, I think we're less like public about shouting that out because it's obviously less impactful.
Yeah. And are you sharing things that are works in progress? Are you only sharing results after things have kind of been fine tuned, a little bit of both? How do you think about that balance?
Yeah, we share an experiment as soon as it launches. Part of what's nice about that is like people can track the experiment. Like we'll share, this is how we're tracking all of our data. Like if you want to get a live view of the experiment, you can subscribe to the card and take a look at that whenever, if you're really interested in how this experiment turns out. And I think, yeah, just letting people come along for the ride is super valuable.
How do you think about collaboration with other teams? Because I know that there's a lot of cross-functional work that happens at every company, but y'all are thinking about sales. During lunch, we were talking about interacting with the product team. Is there any systems or ongoing touch points with those teams as well, or is it more ad hoc?
I think the brainstorming session at the beginning that right now, I think we're probably doing them more quarterly. We realize monthly is probably too often, but quarterly, entire company or at least go-to-market team come together, brainstorm ideas. And then honestly, it's a little more ad hoc, but one thing I said since the very beginning of just our marketing with sales and CS, like, please share cool ideas from customers with me. Like all the time, I'll get, hey, a customer asked me about this question. Do we have data on it? Do we have content on it? Or, hey, is that an experiment that we could run in-house? So we don't have too many official touch points, but we really try to encourage whenever you have an idea or thought, add to it.
Yeah, like the experiment Natalie just referenced on our personalized demos on site, that was actually a suggestion that came from the product team because they were hearing that from customers and were interested in maybe productizing it. And so that was more of like an ad hoc session, but like we felt like it was something worth prioritizing and we're able to just like tap into that knowledge from that part of the company.
And what has been, from either of you, your biggest communication challenges, either with keeping aligned at the executive level or bringing folks along at the peer level or anywhere in between?
I think balancing the amount of sharing, like not wanting it to be distracting, because then if you share too much, people are just going to tune it out, versus making sure that everyone feels like they're heard. We're launching this big experiment, and everyone always naturally has a few concerns. It's going to affect their job. If you're sales, it might affect how many demos you get. But people don't necessarily want to tell you to your face those concerns. So then you might like back channel hear those concerns, or it might come up later and you're like, well, why didn't you just tell me when you launched it?
Right.
That's one thing we're really trying to focus on is like, how can we really encourage people to tell us? Because, you know, if we get a bunch of concerns like, hey, I don't think this experiment's going to work, we have 10 other ones we could work on. That's okay.
And I don't think we've like figured that out fully yet. And I think that'll just come with time because that's like so important. I feel like to just get the right kinds of ideas, like tapping into people and like also help us figure out how to run the experiment. So I think it's something we're still figuring out as we go is like, how can we really closely align with all of the different teams and like really leverage them to figure out how to experiment?
Yeah. And have y'all made any mistakes? Like, have you made any mistakes when it comes to communication or staying aligned or the way that you collaborate with other teams?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing is one, at least for me, especially when I was by myself, just working a little bit too much in a vacuum and just assuming people knew what I was doing. Like just being like, oh yeah, everyone of course knows that I'm working on this, this, and this, and almost not internally promoting enough because I just assumed it was obvious. I like didn't want to distract from people. And then I think like we just talked about making the mistake of not making it clear that everyone has a say of whether we run an experiment or not. I think it's just been us deciding and not making it super clear of like, yeah, if you're uncomfortable with this or if you really get excited about this, like let us know because the best experiments, as I was talking before, those signals are the ones that you get signals across the entire funnels and like different departments are weighing in on it.
Yeah, because I think it's so easy to be like, yeah, we want to hear your feedback and your thoughts and advice. And like everyone hears that from across the board. And it's another thing, like people still don't feel comfortable to share that. So like I said, that's like something we're trying to figure out. It's like on every experiment, how can we like really let people feel comfortable? Be like, actually, we don't think this is going to work. And here's why. Or like, actually, we think it should be framed XYZ way. And like, I also think that's why sharing when we lose is so important or when we learn is so important because people recognize that we're not just trying to do it one way or just trying to like get to some metric. We're really just trying to learn from our customers and try a bunch of different things and iterate on them. So hopefully just over time, as we continue to run this process, we'll get people comfortable with the fact that we're open to hearing their feedback.
Yeah. I feel like it's really hard. I chat with some folks in my coaching practice who do like office hours. They set up times where people can like pull them aside and talk to them, and then nobody goes. And then they set up all this time for the office hours and people are still misaligned. And so I think it's a really tricky balance to find enough ways and enough times and enough unique ways to bring folks along while still getting the work done. It's almost like two competing priorities. It's like we need to bring people along and I also need to do work. And sometimes those feel competing. Does it ever feel that way for the two of you?
One thing we were just talking about that's in a similar vein is we're talking about this specifically a little bit with like the sales team. And our priority is to move fast with experiments, try things, and constantly iterate. Sales' priority is to close deals and have things in a consistent, nice box so they know what's going to happen and it be repeatable and forecastable. Those are our competing priorities. So I think just acknowledging up front, like what is this department or team, what are they focused on? What are their concerns that they're going to have? Like, what are we doing that's going to bring them concerns? And then also addressing that up front really helps with some of that alignment and also make it so it's, even if it is competing, at least we can understand where each other's coming from. It doesn't just feel like, oh, why is sales like not coming to my office hours? Why are they not responding well to this idea?
We've even talked about like for bigger initiatives doing pre-mortems where it's like, hey, what are like ways that you think this will totally fail? And like from the sales team, from the product team, from the CS team, tell us ways you think this will just crash and burn. And that way it's like really clear what their concerns are. We'd be like, hey, this is why we're not concerned about these things. And this is like how we're going to address these things. It's like really nascent, but we're thinking about for future bigger launches, like trying to take that approach early on just to give people a channel to be like, this is what I'm really stressed about. And then we have a way to be like responding to that.
Right. They can disagree and commit, ideally.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like they can disagree with what you're doing and still let you do it and move on board, and hopefully not disagree and not commit, which would be a little bit more of a detractor.
And then there's just permission to be like, this is what I'm scared about. And I think having it be that structured, we're putting on paper everything we're terrified about for this, makes it easier for people to put that pen to paper.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. That's going to be it for this mini episode. As a reminder, you are in the middle of listening to a 7-part mini-series going behind the scenes with the Navattic growth team. And I would love your feedback. I'd love to hear what you think so far. If the content is interesting, if you're learning, if it's resonating, let me know. You can either tag me on LinkedIn at Andrew Kaplan, or you can tag the show at Delivering Value Podcast, or leave me a comment. The two best places would be one, either on my Substack, which is at media.deliveringvalue.co, where all of the episodes will be published, or on any of the individual episode pages on YouTube. And if you are enjoying the show, the best thank you would be a review. You know the game. Those reviews help the algorithm surface my show to other folks just like you. Thank you again for listening. On to the next episode.